Hey there, just finished our 9th week of quarantine, and it is Saturday night, so it's movie night. Got a quadruple feature plan for us, so let's talk about some movies. But first, we lost another filmmaker today. Lynn Shelton, very important filmmaker, passed away. She was very young, 54 years old, and I did not intend for my quarantine quadruple features to have an in memoriam section, but since coronavirus has started, we've lost Stuart Gordon, we talked about in week 2, director of Reanimator, Nobuhiko Obayashi, who directed the 1977 masterpiece House, and then just today we got the news of Lynn Shelton. Lynn Shelton was a pioneer of the mumblecore movement. Mumblecore was a movement of films that happened in the from the mid-2000s to the late 2000s is when they predominantly took place. It's kind of an offshoot of independent films, but they're like really independent films. They're very cheap, really self-financed. They're pretty light on plot, and they really focus on characters and dialogue. The relationships between the characters are the most important things in those films. So the importance of the mumblecore movement in the grand scheme of things is debated. Some people write it off as not as important as something like the French New Wave or Italian neorealism or the independent film movement of the 90s. But there are some people that feel very passionately about it, myself included, because mumblecore movies came to me at a very important time in my life. I had just moved to LA. I was very stressed about how I was going to break into the film industry. I was going to the movies. I was seeing movies that I did not think were that wonderful, big budget special effects stuff, really bad writing, poor dialogue. And then I discovered mumblecore movies by filmmakers like Lynn Shelton and the Duplass Bros. They were making movies that really resonated with me because I was connecting more with the characters. And that was the first time that I kind of saw a path into the industry. And I think every filmmaker has a movie that they see that really influences them into finally taking the step to go film something. And for me, that movie was Baghead by Mark Duplass and Jay Duplass. After I watched Baghead, the next day I went and watched it again, and then a few days later I watched it again, and I was really taken with how good the writing was and the dialogue and the performances. So it finally seemed like, okay, it's possible to actually do this. I had a friend named Matt, he's a really great actor, and I said, Matt, do you know what mumblecore is? And he said, no, tell me. So I explained to him what it was, and I said, we should make a movie. I made my first movie and Matt was in it, and I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to take that first step if I hadn't already seen filmmakers that were in a similar position as me taking that step themselves. Lynn Shelton, she made movies like Hump Day, Touchy Feely, Your Sister's Sister, and she even released a movie last year in 2019. She was still making films. The Duplass Bros have obviously gone on to do really great stuff. They've hoisted a lot of struggling independent filmmakers up out of the ranks. When they made Baghead, it starred Greta Gerwig, and now she's has an amazing career and is a wonderful director in her own right. So the movies they're pretty special to me. We are not watching mumblecore movies tonight, but I just wanted to take a moment to pay tribute to another filmmaker that we unfortunately lost. So go watch some of Lynn Shelton's movies and enjoy some of the cinematic joy that she spread into the world. So today's theme is kind of similar. I'll tie it in. We are watching 90s crime thrillers, and we are watching 4 of the best movies of the decade. I'm really excited about tonight's quadruple features because we're watching a few of my favorite movies, including my favorite movie of all time, which is Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. And I know this movie is a very kind of safe answer for what's your favorite movie, especially for white filmmakers in my age range. It's impossible not to be influenced by Pulp Fiction. This movie came out at a very important time for my brain developmentally. I saw it when I was 10 years old. And at that time, I had not yet seen Kurosawa's Rashomon. I hadn't seen Citizen Kane. I hadn't seen movies that played with time the way that Tarantino plays with time. I was really blown away that the story unfolded more like a novel, blending the timeline. It wasn't one kind of clear-cut linear story. It went all over the place like when you read a book. And that really opened my mind for the possibility of storytelling cinematically. I hadn't seen anything like that. And still to this day, I think there are very few films that do it as effectively. So it's a very groundbreaking film in that regard for me. We were talking about mumblecore, but this movie is really important to independent film in general. This is the movie I feel that really blew the word independent film up into common vernacular. Quentin Tarantino was one of the first filmmakers that I can recall in my youth that was like propelled into rock stardom. He was almost more famous than his movies. He started with Reservoir Dogs, that was his first movie, and he started around a time when other filmmakers were getting their starts, like Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith, Steven Soderbergh. Those were the filmmakers I was looking at when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and that was the path I was going to try to emulate. That's what I saw as an accessible way to make movies. You go make them yourself, you get the financing yourself, you make whatever you want. You take it to film festivals, people will buy it, and then you'll have a career. Of course, it doesn't work as seamlessly as that now. It was working like that pretty well in the 90s. Steven Soderbergh was probably the first very successful independent filmmaker in that regard. He made Sex, Lies, and Videotape in 1989. He took it to Cannes. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and he got a whole career based off that one movie. But a few years ago, I read this really depressing quote that he said, I'm going to paraphrase, back in when he got discovered, getting a career off of getting a film into a film festival was like hitting a fastball with a baseball bat. Getting discovered that way today is like hitting a fastball with another thrown fastball. So it's a little depressing. It doesn't happen nearly as frequently. It still happens once in a while. Until then, I guess just keep making your stuff and hope that something sticks and gets your foot in the door. But yeah, Steven Soderbergh, Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, all of those filmmakers were very, very inspirational to me. And that's the way I think independent film works the best. It's like this chain of filmmakers that this filmmaker inspired this filmmaker, inspired this filmmaker, until like it gets all the way to you, where you see all of these people that did it before you, and you're able to kind of jump in there and try to do it yourself, and hopefully we'll get discovered and have a career as well. So I don't know how far back that chain links. I mean, John Cassavetes is one of the most pivotal figures in the independent film movement. He was one of the first guys to really just go out there and do it himself. But all of these filmmakers have just continued inspiring future filmmakers. Richard Linklater made Slacker, which inspired Kevin Smith to make Clerks, which I'm sure inspired countless other filmmakers to move on to their own films. So I think independent film is a really beautiful thing. And when I think of the independent film movement, I'm really thinking of Pulp Fiction, even though that movie had like, I don't know, like a $20 million budget or something like that. It was, by all intents and purposes, not an independent film by today's independent film standards, especially when we're talking about mumblecore. But that was still kind of the movie you watched that had like a vision behind it. And you didn't really see a ton of studio interference, because that was before Miramax was really the powerhouse that it became. Miramax was basically like the house that Pulp Fiction built. There's not much to be said about the film that hasn't been said before. It is a blast. I've seen Pulp Fiction probably more than any movie in my life. I'm wearing a Jack Rabbit Slim shirt right now. Brilliant performances. Tarantino was amazing at rediscovering talent. John Travolta had been out of the public eye for a number of years, and then he came back big, and it relaunched his career. He did that also with Pam Grier for Jackie Brown. I mean, he continues doing it with all of his movies, but Pulp Fiction is still the star in his filmography for me. And we're gonna watch that one, our first crime thriller of the 90s, 1994's Pulp Fiction. 90s crime thriller number 2 from the very next year, 1995. One of the best movies of the decade, Michael Mann's Heat. If you haven't seen Heat, you gotta go watch this movie. Do yourself a favor. This movie is thrilling. It's exciting. It's just about 3 hours long, but it flies, and it is well worth it. Of course, the movie stars Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and the movie is very famous for being the first movie to ever have both of them have a scene together. Of course, they had been in The Godfather Part 2, but they were never on screen together. This is the first time they actually had a scene together, and the first time they're on screen, it's riveting. I mean, the rest of the movie is brilliant as well, but the 3 hours is worth the few minutes of watching these two acting powerhouses in a coffee shop together. And it's not a crazy scene. They're not chomping the scenery. It's just two masters of the craft having a conversation. Of course, they would later go on to do Righteous Kill, and then, of course, they would do The Irishman, so it was great to finally see them reunited for Martin Scorsese's phenomenal film, The Irishman. What Michael Mann does so brilliantly, he's a really great filmmaker, but I want to talk about something he does in a lot of his movies. It's just such a simple thing. There is a rule in filmmaking called the 180-degree rule. And basically what that means is that if I'm having a scene and I'm having a conversation with someone here, the camera, if it's on the side, it stays on this side. So you can shoot it from any angle you want from this side, but you stay on this side of our bodies. You don't cross the line. And the reason you do that is to not disorient the audience. Because if you went from this angle straight to this angle, I'm now facing a completely different direction. You're looking at a side of the room and you're like, what the hell is on this side of the room? We haven't even seen that side of the room. So you don't cut past that 180-degree line. Otherwise, it's going to be very disorienting for the audience. And even though it's probably only going to take the audience a moment or two to reorient themselves for what exactly they're looking at, that's a moment or two that you've pulled them out of the story. So what Michael Mann does in his dialogue scenes, he shoots dialogue scenes better than almost anybody, is he seamlessly crosses the 180-degree line with the audience. So during a dialogue scene, he'll glide the camera across, usually from behind, but I'm holding my own camera, and then the audience has now traveled across the line with him. He can then freely cut back and forth between angles on the other side, and it's just such a cool thing to watch. When you know that's what he's doing in the shot when the camera moves, it's a very exciting thing to watch. And the moments that Michael Mann chooses to cross the line are on thematically appropriate moments as well. They're either on a big emotional shift in the scene or a power dynamic shift between the two characters that are having a conversation. That's when he chooses to cross the line and start filming from different angles. And that's just a masterful example of using cinematic language to tell the story. That's telling the story with the camera. That's really emphasizing the script and the subtext of the script visually, which is a level of filmmaking that many, many filmmakers never get to, but it really just shows Michael Mann's mastery of the craft. The rest of Heat is brilliant as well. Possibly the most exciting daylight robbery scene in the history of cinema. It's a terrific film, Michael Mann's Heat. Movie number 3, 1996. Our movies go 94, 95, 96, 97. And this one is just a phenomenal movie. The Coen Bros' Fargo. This movie won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. It is so well written. The characters are all so well developed and unique. They could only inhabit a Coen Brothers universe. Now, when this film came out, there was kind of these weird rules set up with the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, where there couldn't be dual directing credit on a movie or something like that. I'm a little hazy on exactly what the rules are. So, for the first portion of the filmmaker's career, even though they were both directing the movies, they decided that Joel Coen would be the director, Ethan Coen would be the producer, and then they'd get dual credit for writing. So for a number of years, the films were credited as directed by Joel Coen. And I always thought it's going to be really awkward when they finally win Best Director and Joel Coen has to go up and accept it himself. Fortunately, by the time they won Best Director for No Country for Old Men, the rules had been lifted, so it was actually officially directed by both of them. But this movie is just a snowy thriller. It's one of the best thrillers of the 90s. If you haven't seen Fargo, do not hesitate. This also spawned a television show, which very ingeniously pays tribute to the movie in the smallest, most brilliant ways. Just a quick follow-up. Rewatching Fargo, I was reminded just how much I love the marriage of Margie and Norm. Their relationship is so beautiful. The way they show the way that they love each other is in such small but far more impactful and profound ways than you normally see in a movie. Normally it's two people like running at each other in the rain and grabbing each other in passionate kisses and a "I love you so fucking much." And they don't do it that way in Fargo. The way that their relationship is portrayed is in much smaller acts of kindness. Like he wakes up early to make his pregnant wife eggs. She buys him night crawlers to go fishing. So it's these really small, honest ways that make the relationship so beautiful to watch. And the marriage of Norm and Margie, is my favorite cinematic marriage. Also, Margie is such an awesome character. She's my favorite cinematic cop. She is badass, she's smart, she's level-headed, really kind of inverts what you'd expect from a cop thriller. Frances McDormand also won Best Actress for this movie as well. Also very well-deserved. Final movie, Curtis Hanson's brilliant L.A. Confidential. Takes place in the 1950s in Tinseltown. Detectives trying to unravel this mystery. It's very much a throwback to film noirs that you saw in the 50s, and then later in the 70s, neo-noir. We'll talk about all that in a few weeks in much more detail. All of our films today reflect films of a bygone era. Mid-range thrillers made for adults. They're rated R, they're edgy, they're sophisticated, they're not just big-budget live-action cartoons for adults to go sit in for 3 hours and totally forget their purpose in life. These movies reaffirm your purpose in life. They make you question what's right, what's wrong. They make you question everything about the world that you should be questioning. They're tremendous films. They're films that we don't really get as frequently anymore, but thankfully we can always go back and revisit the great ones that have been made in the past, which is just what we're going to be doing tonight.